My mother decided to turn my son's 10th birthday into a lecture on classism, publicly humiliating my husband for working with his hands. She thought her money gave her the right to bully us, but she didn't realize I held the one legal document that could leave her homeless. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence that fell over the patio was absolute. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a lull in conversation, nor the anticipatory silence before a toast. It was a vacuum, a sudden, violent removal of all air from the space, leaving everyone gasping. I stood frozen near the buffet table, a half-eaten shrimp skewer in my hand, watching my mother, Beatrice. She was standing by the three-tiered custom cake, her hand resting possessively on the shoulder of my son, Leo, who had just turned 10. Leo, whose face was currently crinkled in confusion, his eyes darting from his grandmother to his father. Mark, my husband, was standing a few feet away. He was still wearing his polite, tight-lipped smile, the one he reserved specifically for my mother's events. He had dressed up for today, wearing a crisp button-down and slacks, trying so hard to fit into Beatrice's world of country clubs and manicured lawns. But his hands, large, calloused, and permanently stained with the faint, honest grit of the earth despite how much he scrubbed them, hung by his sides. Beatrice had just tapped her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The chiming sound still seemed to hang in the humid air. "I just want to say," Beatrice announced, her voice projecting with that practiced, aristocratic lilt she had perfected over 40 years of social climbing, "how proud I am of my grandson. Double digits, a big milestone." She looked down at Leo, smoothing his hair, a gesture that looked affectionate but was actually controlling, fixing a cowlick that didn't exist. "You have such a bright future, Leo," she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd of her friends, judges, doctors, old money inheritors. She wasn't looking at us. She was performing for them. "You're smart, you're sharp. I know you're going to do great things." Then the smile on her face sharpened. It didn't reach her eyes, it never did. She turned her gaze slowly, deliberately toward Mark. "Study hard, sweetie," she said, her voice dropping just an octave, loud enough for every single person on the sandstone patio to hear clearly. "You need to focus on your education. You don't want to end up like your father." The wind seemed to stop. A bird chirped somewhere in the distance, sounding obscenely cheerful against the sudden, crushing weight of the insult. "Excuse me," Mark said. His voice was quiet, cracked. Beatrice laughed, a light, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. "Oh, don't be sensitive, Mark. I just mean Leo has the potential for, well, intellectual pursuits. Not everyone is cut out for manual labor. Digging holes is fine for some, but I want more for Leo." Mark owns a landscape construction firm. He designs and builds complex retaining walls, water features, and architectural gardens. He is an artist who works with stone and soil. But to Beatrice, he was just the help that her daughter had unfortunately married. I looked at Leo. His lip was trembling. He looked at his dad, looking for reassurance, looking for the hero he knew, but seeing the shame that Beatrice had just painted over him. Something inside me, a tether that had been fraying for a decade, finally snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was a quiet, definitive severance. I placed the shrimp skewer back on the porcelain plate with a soft clink. "That's it," I said. I didn't scream. I didn't throw wine in her face, though the urge was so strong my fingers twitched. Instead, I walked over to the table where Leo's pile of gifts sat, gifts from people who didn't really know him, expensive gadgets selected by personal shoppers. "Edith," Beatrice looked at me, feigning innocence. "What are you doing?" "Leo, get your shoes," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening in my chest. Mark grabbed the cooler. "Edith, don't be dramatic," Beatrice scoffed, taking a sip of her champagne. "We haven't even cut the cake. I ordered the Belgian chocolate ganache you like." I turned to her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the shrinking sensation I usually felt under her gaze. I felt 10 feet tall. You just insulted my husband and humiliated your grandson at his own party, I said, projecting my voice so her friends in the back, the judge, the senator's wife, could hear every syllable. You told a 10-year-old that his father, a man who built a business from nothing, is a failure. I said no such thing, she gasped, clutching her pearls in a caricature of shock. I was merely encouraging education. You were being cruel, I cut her off. And I'm done, we are leaving. I grabbed Leo's hand. He was crying now, silent tears tracking through the birthday face paint on his cheek. Mark was already moving, his face set in stone, picking up our bags. If you walk out that gate, Edith, Beatrice hissed, abandoning the sweet grandmother act, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, don't expect a cent for his college fund. You hear me? I will cut you off. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the makeup. She needed control like she needed oxygen, and she just realized she was suffocating. Keep your money, Mother, I said. Leo has a father who can provide for him, and unlike you, he knows how to build something that lasts. I turned my back on her. As we walked through the garden gate, leaving the stunned silence of the party behind, I knew I had just started a war. But as I gripped Mark's hand and squeezed Leo's shoulder, I knew something else, too. Beatrice thought she held all the cards because of the family trust. But the betrayal was worse than the insult itself. It was the realization that she would sacrifice her grandson's happiness just to score a point against my husband. The walk to the car was a blur of gravel crunching under our feet and the distant, murmuring hum of the party resuming behind us. Beatrice would be spinning the narrative already. I could practically hear her voice echoing off the high stone walls of her estate. Poor Edith, she's always been so unstable. Mark has turned her against me. I was only trying to help. We got into our SUV, a sturdy, practical vehicle that smelled of potting soil and peppermint gum. Mark got into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Leo climbed into the back, buckling his seatbelt with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. For the first 5 minutes of the drive, nobody spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with the residue of Beatrice's poison. I watched the manicured hedges of my mother's neighborhood give way to the more rugged, tree-lined streets of our part of town. Then, a small voice from the back seat broke us. Is Dad's job bad? My heart shattered. I spun around in my seat to look at Leo. He was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. No, Leo, I said fiercely. No, Dad's job is amazing. Dad is an artist. You know the park downtown? The one with the big stone fountain where we sail your boats. Leo nodded. Dad built that, I said. He built it with his hands and his brain. Grandma doesn't understand that. She thinks the only way to be smart is to sit in an office. Mark let out a breath, a long, shaky exhale. He reached over and took my hand, squeezing it. His palm was rough, warm, and solid. I'm sorry, guys, Mark whispered, his eyes fixed on the road. I shouldn't have let her get to me. I ruined the party. You did not, I said, my voice rising with indignation. She ruined it. She planned that, Mark. She waited until the toast. She waited until everyone was watching. That wasn't an accident. It was a sniper shot. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then it buzzed again, and again. A rapid-fire assault of notifications. I looked down, Beatrice. Text, you are making a scene over nothing. Come back immediately. Text, the judge is asking where you went. This is embarrassing. Text, pick up your phone, Edith. Text, you are being an ungrateful brat. Mark is poisoning you. Don't look at it, Mark said gently. I'm not, I lied. I flipped the phone face down, but the buzzing continued, vibrating against the plastic console like an angry hornet. We pulled into our driveway. Our house wasn't a mansion like Beatrice's. It was a 1920s craftsman bungalow that we had spent the last 10 years restoring together. Mark had rebuilt the porch. I had re-landscaped the entire half-acre into a native pollinator garden. It was a home full of life, color, and love, everything Beatrice's cold, marble-floored mausoleum was not. As we walked inside, the relief of being in our own space was palpable, but the shadow of the afternoon lingered. Mark went to the kitchen to get Leo a glass of water. I stood in the hallway, looking at the framed photos on the wall. Beatrice was in none of them. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "What?" I said, not bothering with a greeting. "You have humiliated me," Beatrice's voice shrieked, devoid of the polished charm she used in public. "Do you know what people are saying? That I raised a rude, impulsive daughter who married beneath her. They're probably saying you're a bully who attacks children on their birthday," I countered, leaning against the wall for support. My legs felt weak. "I was helping him," she screamed. "Someone has to. You let him run wild in the dirt with that laborer you married. I am trying to secure his future. If you think I'm going to let you keep my grandson away from me, you are delusional. I have rights, Edith. I have money." "Money," I repeated, a cold calm washing over me. "That's all you have, isn't it?" "It's what runs the world, darling," she spat. "And without me, you'd be living in a gutter. Don't forget who paid for your veterinary school. Don't forget who the executor of the family trust is." "I haven't forgotten, Mother," I said softly, "but you seem to have forgotten something too." "And what is that?" she scoffed. "You've forgotten that I can read," I said, "and I know exactly how the trust is structured. You think you're the owner, Beatrice, but you're just the manager." There was a pause on the line, a hesitation. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. "Go back to your party," I said. "Enjoy the cake." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was adrenaline. Beatrice had spent my entire life dangling the inheritance over my head like a carrot, using it to control where I went to school, how I dressed, and how I raised Leo. She truly believed she was the source of all our stability. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. The trust wasn't hers, it was my father's, and she had been getting very, very sloppy with the paperwork. To understand why walking out of that party was such a monumental act of rebellion, you have to understand Beatrice. And to understand Beatrice, you have to understand the lie she had been living for 30 years. My father, Richard, was the source of the money. He was a brilliant patent attorney who had invested wisely in the tech boom of the 90s. He was also a kind, quiet man who loved birdwatching and hated conflict. Beatrice steamrolled him. She spent his money on galas, on committees, on maintaining an image of old money, aristocracy that she hadn't actually been born into. She was the daughter of a gas station owner from Ohio who had reinvented herself the moment she got a ring on her finger. When Dad died 5 years ago, Beatrice didn't mourn him so much as she mourned the loss of her buffer. Without him there to soften her edges, she became jagged. She turned all that critical energy onto me. I became a veterinarian because I loved science and I loved animals, but Beatrice told everyone I was in medicine. When I started dating Mark, she refused to acknowledge his profession for 3 years. She told her friends he was in real estate development. "Why do you let her talk to you like that?" Mark had asked me years ago, after Beatrice had critiqued my weight, my hair, and my choice of curtains in a single 10-minute visit. "Because she's family," I had said, the automatic excuse of the abused, "and because she's lonely." But it wasn't just loneliness, it was malice. That evening, after Leo was in bed, I sat in my home office. It was a messy room, filled with stacks of veterinary journals and Mark's blueprints. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing desk and pulled out a thick, dusty folder. The Richard J. Sterling Family Trust. Beatrice had always handled the lawyers. She had always signed the checks. She made a big show of disbursing funds to me for things like Leo's private school tuition or house repairs, always accompanied by a lecture about gratitude and fiscal responsibility. But 6 months ago, a letter had arrived at my house by mistake. It was a bank statement for the trust. Usually, these went to Beatrice's accountant. I had opened it without thinking. I saw withdrawals, massive ones, $15,000 to elite event planning, $22,000 to luxury voyages, $8,000 to Saks Fifth Avenue. The trust was designed to support the health, education, and maintenance of the beneficiaries. Beatrice was the trustee, yes, but I was the primary beneficiary, and Leo was the secondary. The trust allowed for her reasonable living expenses, but it was strictly protected against waste and frivolous depletion. I hadn't said anything at the time. I was too scared of the confrontation. I had just tucked the statement away, a secret weapon I hoped I'd never have to use. But tonight, as I replayed the image of Mark's humiliated face and Leo's tears, the fear evaporated. I opened my laptop and Googled the name of the law firm that managed the trust: Harrison, Finch and Associates. Then, I looked up the name of the specific partner listed on the documents: Charles Vance. Beatrice had mentioned Charles before. She called him Charlie. She bragged about their lunches. She hinted that he helped her move things around. The antagonist wasn't just my mother. It was the system she had built around herself: the enablers, the sycophants, and potentially a crooked lawyer who was helping her drain my father's legacy to fund her socialite fantasies. She had called Mark a failure. She had told Leo not to be like him. I looked at the bank statement again. Beatrice wasn't just mean, she was a thief. And she was stealing from her own grandson. "You want a war, Mother?" I whispered to the empty room. "Okay, let's see how you do when the ATM stops spitting out cash." I picked up my phone and dialed a number. It wasn't the family lawyer. It was a friend from vet school, Sarah. Sarah, whose husband just happened to be a forensic accountant for the state prosecutor's office. "Hey, Sarah," I said when she picked up. "I know it's late, but I need a favor, a big one." The following Tuesday, I sat in a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and stale coffee. Across the table sat Dave, Sarah's husband. Dave was a man who looked like he was made of beige corduroy and patience. He was the kind of person you wouldn't look twice at in a grocery store, but in a room full of chaotic financial data, he was a shark. "Okay, Edith," Dave said, adjusting his glasses and sliding a stack of printouts toward me. "I've gone through the preliminary statements you sent over, and I have to ask, did you authorize a capital improvement loan for a property in the Caymans?" I blinked, my coffee cup pausing halfway to my mouth. "A what? No, I've never been to the Caymans. I've barely been to Florida." Dave sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to deflate his entire posture. He tapped a line on the spreadsheet with a pen cap. "Well, according to this, the Richard J. Sterling Trust lent $200,000 to a shell company registered in Georgetown 3 months ago. The signatory for the loan, Beatrice Sterling." I felt the blood drain from my face. $200,000. That was Leo's college tuition. That was the down payment on the expansion Mark wanted for his business. That was my father's life work. Is it legal?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's a gray area if she can argue it's an investment for the trust's growth," Dave explained, his voice devoid of emotion, strictly professional. "But looking at these other transaction fees, Edith, she's treating this trust like a personal piggy bank. There are consulting fees paid to her friends. There are administrative costs that exactly match the price of a first-class ticket to Paris. If this goes in front of a probate judge, she's not just going to lose her trusteeship. She could be looking at criminal charges for breach of fiduciary duty." I stared at the numbers. They weren't just digits, they were betrayals. Every zero was a lie she had told me about tightening our belts. Every comma was a criticism she had leveled at Mark for not making enough money. "She told us we couldn't afford a math tutor for Leo last year," I whispered, the anger rising in my throat like bile. "She said the market was down. She said the trust was underperforming." "The market is up 12%, Dave said dryly. "The trust is underperforming because she's looting it." I left Dave's office with a heavy banker's box of evidence and a stomach full of lead. I drove to Mark's job site instead of going home. I needed to see him. I needed to see something real. Mark was standing in a muddy trench, directing a crew as they lowered a massive slab of limestone into place for a retaining wall. He was sweating, his boots caked in clay, shouting instructions over the roar of a mini excavator. When he saw me, he signaled the operator to cut the engine. He jogged over, wiping his forehead with his forearm. "Everything okay? Is it Leo?" "Leo is fine," I said, leaning against the hood of my car. "But my mother is going to jail." I laid it all out for him right there, amidst the noise of the construction site. I told him about the Caymans, the shopping sprees disguised as office expenses, the slow, parasitic draining of our son's future. Mark listened, his face hardening. He didn't look surprised exactly. He looked resigned. "She always looked down on me for working with my hands," Mark said quietly, kicking a clod of dirt against the tire. "Meanwhile, she's never done an honest day's work in her life. She's just stealing yours." "I have to stop her, Mark," I said. "Dave says we need to file an emergency petition to remove her as trustee. We have to freeze the accounts." "Do it," Mark said, his eyes meeting mine. They were fierce, protective. "She came for our son, Edith. She tried to shame him. You don't owe her protection anymore." "It's going to get ugly," I warned him. "She'll scorch the earth. She'll come after your reputation. She'll try to turn the family against us." Mark laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. He reached out and took my hand, his calloused thumb rubbing over my knuckles. "Let her try. I build walls for a living, Eddie. Let's see if she can break one of mine." The confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in my kitchen 3 days later. I had sent the initial demand letter through a lawyer Dave recommended, a shark named Aliner who ate prestigious trust at Orny's for breakfast. The letter simply requested a full forensic accounting of the trust for the last 5 years. It was a warning shot. Beatrice didn't respond to the lawyer. She drove straight to my house. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when the front door burst open. We hadn't changed the locks yet, a mistake. Beatrice stormed in, a whirlwind of cashmere and fury. "How dare you?" she shrieked, slamming a crumpled piece of paper onto the granite island. It was the demand letter. "How dare you send this filth to Charles? Do you know how embarrassed I was when he called me?" "Hello, Mother," I said calmly, not looking up from the bell peppers. "I see you got the mail." "You ungrateful, vicious little girl," she spat, pacing the kitchen floor. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile. "After everything I've done for you, I send you to private schools, I buy you clothes, I host parties for your son." "You insulted my husband at that party," I interrupted, finally setting the knife down. I turned to face her. "And you humiliated Leo." "I was giving him advice," Beatrice yelled, her face flushing a blotchy red. "Someone has to tell him the truth. If he relies on you too, he'll end up working at a gas station." "Like your father?" I asked softly. Beatrice froze. Her eyes widened. It was a low blow, bringing up her humble origins, but I was done playing by the rules of polite society. "My father was a businessman," she hissed. "Your father pumped gas, Mother, and there's no shame in that. He worked hard," I said, stepping closer to her. "Just like Mark works hard, the only person in this family who doesn't work is you." "I manage the estate," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I manage the legacy." "You're stealing from it," I said. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Beatrice stopped pacing. She looked at me with a mix of shock and genuine confusion, as if I had started speaking a foreign language. "Excuse me," she whispered. "The Caymans, Mother," I said, crossing my arms. "The consulting fees to your friend Sheila. The $20,000 for office supplies that suspiciously matches the invoice for your new sunroom." Beatrice scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "You don't understand finance, Edith. Those are necessary leverage strategies. Charles and I have a system." "Charles is a crook," I said, "and you're a thief. I know about the $200,000, Beatrice. I know it's gone." Beatrice's face shifted. The shock vanished, replaced by a cold, sneering mask of superiority. She stepped forward, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and gin. "So what?" she said, her voice dropping to a menace. "It's my money, Edith. Richard earned it and I spent my life supporting him. I deserve it. Do you think I'm going to live like a pauper so you can buy more dog food and flannel shirts for your husband?" "It's not your money," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "It's a trust for me, and for Leo. You are the trustee, you have a fiduciary duty." "I have a duty to maintain the family standing," she shouted. "Which includes my standing. If I look poor, we look poor. I did what I had to do to keep us in the circles that matter." "You stole from your grandson to impress people who don't even like you," I said. Beatrice laughed. It was an ugly sound. "You think you can stop me? I'm the trustee, Edith. I have broad discretion. Charles drafted that document specifically to give me power. You can sue me if you want. I'll drag it out for 10 years. I'll spend every last dime of your inheritance on my legal defense. By the time I'm done, there won't be a penny left for Leo." She leaned in close, her eyes glittering with malice. "Drop this, Edith. Apologize to me, or I will bankrupt this trust so fast your head will spin, and then I'll sue for visitation rights. I'll tell the court Mark is an unfit father. I'll tell them you're unstable. I have judges in my phone contacts, darling. Who do you have? A man who digs ditches." She grabbed the demand letter off the counter, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it at my chest. "Fix this," she commanded, "or I will destroy you." She turned and marched out of the house, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. She had admitted it. She didn't care about the morality of it. She only cared about winning. And she was right about one thing: she would burn the money just to spite me. But she was wrong about who I had. I didn't just have a ditch digger, I had a partner. And I had the truth. Beatrice made good on her threat immediately. The next morning, Mark's business line began ringing. It was the bank. His line of credit, which he used to buy materials for big jobs, had been frozen. Beatrice hadn't done it legally. She had simply called the bank manager, a man she played bridge with, and whispered that Mark was unda. Our investigation for fraud. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but in a small town, a whisper from a Sterling was enough to pause everything. Then came the calls from the family. Aunt Linda, my father's sister, called me in tears. "Edith, your mother says you're on drugs," Linda sobbed. "She says you pushed her at your house. She says you're keeping Leo from her because you're having a breakdown." "It's not true, Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while I paced the living room. "She's stealing from the trust. I have proof." "Oh, honey," Linda sighed, her voice dripping with pity. "Beatrice said you'd say that. She said you're paranoid. She's worried about Leo. She's talking about calling Child Protective Services." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. She was going nuclear. She was attacking my motherhood. "She's trying to isolate us," Mark said. He was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing his frozen accounts on his laptop. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. "She wants us to panic. She wants us to come crawling back so she can turn the tap back on." "We're not crawling," I said. "We're running to the courthouse." We met with Alina, the aggressive trust attorney, that afternoon. I brought everything: the statements Dave had found, the text messages, and a recording. I hadn't told Beatrice, but we have a security camera in the kitchen. A nanny cam we used to check on our aging dog when we were at work. It recorded audio. I played the clip for Alina. Beatrice's voice rang out, clear and hateful. "It's my money. I'll drag it out for 10 years. I'll spend every last dime of your inheritance on my legal defense." Alina listened, her eyebrows climbing higher and higher. When the clip ended, she sat back in her leather chair and let out a low whistle. "Well," Alina said, a shark-like grin spreading across her face, "that changes things." "Is it enough?" I asked. "It's evidence of intent to commit waste," Alina said. "It proves she's not acting in the beneficiary's interest. She explicitly stated she would deplete the funds to spite you. That's an immediate breach. But we need more to nail the lawyer, Charles Vance. If we take Beatrice down, Vance will claim ignorance. He'll say she lied to him. She didn't lie to him, I said. She said they have a system. We need the correspondence, Aliner said. We need to see the emails between Beatrice and Vance. How do we get those? Mark asked. Attorney-client privilege. Not if the attorney is aiding in a crime, Aliner said. It's called the crime-fraud exception, but we need a smoking gun to trigger it. We went home, feeling a mix of hope and dread. The clock was ticking. Every day Beatrice remained trustee was another day she could siphon funds or sabotage Mark's business. That night, I went into the attic. I was looking for my father's old birdwatching journals, comfort reading, but inside one of the boxes of his old papers, I found an old iPad. His iPad. It had been off for 5 years. I plugged it in, not expecting much. The screen flickered to life. The passcode, I guessed his birthday, it unlocked. I opened the email app. It hadn't updated in years, but the cached emails were there. And there, in the Sent folder, was an email from 5 years ago, 2 weeks before Dad died. Subject: concerns regarding Beatrice. To Charles Vance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it. Charles, I am concerned about Beatrice's spending. I want to restructure the trust to require a co-signatory for any withdrawal over $5,000. I want Edith to be that co-signatory. Please draft the paperwork immediately. I will come in on Monday to sign. He died on Sunday. I scrolled to the response from Charles Vance. Richard, I will have the papers ready. We can discuss this on Monday. I sat back on the dusty attic floor, tears streaming down my face. Dad knew. He knew she would do this. He tried to protect us. But then I saw the next email. It was dated 2 days after Dad died. From Beatrice to Charles Vance. Charles, regarding the draft Richard requested, destroy it. We will proceed with the original arrangement. I will make sure you are compensated for the extra administrative burden. And Charles's reply, understood, Beatrice. My condolences on your loss. I will bill the consulting fee to the main account as discussed. I gasped loud enough that Mark heard me from downstairs. Edith, he called out. I got them, I screamed, scrambling down the attic stairs, clutching the iPad like it was a holy relic. Mark, I got them both. I showed him the emails, the proof that Charles Vance knew about my father's wishes and suppressed them. The proof that he and Beatrice had conspired to ignore my father's final instructions in exchange for a payoff. This wasn't just mismanagement anymore. This was fraud. She's done, Mark said, reading the screen, his voice filled with awe. Edith, she's absolutely done. Not yet, I said, my eyes narrowing. She threatened to ruin us in public. She threatened to destroy your reputation. I looked at the date on the calendar. Tomorrow was the Sterling Family Foundation Gala, the biggest event of the year. Beatrice was the chairwoman, the judge would be there, the senator would be there, all of her circle. She wants a show, I said, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. Let's give her one. The Sterling Family Foundation Gala was held in the ballroom of the city's most historic hotel. It was a room of velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and people who pretended to like each other for the sake of tax write-offs. I wore a dress I had bought 3 years ago for a friend's wedding, a simple navy blue number that Beatrice would have called pedestrian. Mark wore his best suit, the charcoal one he wore to meet high-end clients. He looked handsome, strong, and terrified. You ready? He asked, his hand hovering over the heavy brass handle of the ballroom doors. No, I admitted, clutching the iPad in my purse, but let's do it anyway. We pushed the doors open. The hum of conversation didn't stop immediately. It rippled away, starting from the people nearest the door and spreading outward like a wave until the entire room fell silent. 300 heads turned. Beatrice was on the small stage at the front of the room, standing behind a podium adorned with white roses. She was mid-speech, holding a glass of champagne. Charles Vance, the lawyer, was standing just to her right, looking smug in a tuxedo that cost more than my car. And that is why, Beatrice's voice faltered as she saw us. Her smile froze, then twisted into a scowl. She leaned into the microphone. Well, it seems my daughter has decided to join us. Better late than never, Edith, though I see you didn't check the dress code. A ripple of polite, cruel laughter moved through the room. We didn't stop walking. We marched straight down the center aisle, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Security," Beatrice called out, her voice pitching higher. "Please escort them out. This is a private event for donors." Two large men in suits stepped forward from the edges of the room. "I am a donor," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "In fact, I'm the biggest donor here, since every cent my mother has donated in the last 5 years was stolen from me." The gasp that went through the room was audible. Beatrice turned white. Charles Vance took a step forward, his face flushing red. "That is slander," Charles shouted, pointing a finger at me. "Get them out of here, now." "It's not slander if it's in writing, Charles," I said, holding up the iPad. We reached the front of the room. I didn't climb the stage. I stood right in front of it, looking up at them. I turned to face the crowd, the judge, the senator, the movers and shakers of the town. "My mother told you all that my husband was a failure," I said, gesturing to Mark, who stood like a sentinel beside me. "She told my son that he shouldn't be like his father. She claimed she was the guardian of the sterling legacy." "Edith, stop this madness," Beatrice screamed. She looked frantic, her eyes darting around the room, seeing the curiosity turning to suspicion in the eyes of her friends. "You are having a breakdown. Don't listen to her. She's mentally ill." "Am I?" I asked. I unlocked the iPad and tapped the screen. I had already connected it via Bluetooth to the room's audio system, a trick Mark had figured out while we were waiting in the lobby. The system was open for the DJ. I hit play on the audio, recording from my kitchen. Beatrice's voice, shrill and undeniable, boomed through the speakers of the ballroom. "It's my money, Edith. I'll drag it out for 10 years. I'll spend every last dime of your inheritance on my legal defense. Fix this, or I will destroy you." The silence in the room was deafening. Beatrice stood frozen, her mouth open, the color draining from her face until she looked like a wax figure. I cut the audio, then I held up the iPad again. "And Charles," I said, turning to the lawyer who was now loosening his tie with a trembling hand. "I have the emails. The ones where my father asked you to protect the trust from her, and the ones where you agreed to destroy that request in exchange for a $20,000 kickback disguised as a consulting fee." I looked at the judge, sitting in the front row. He was a stern man who had known my father for 30 years. He was staring at Charles Vance with a look of absolute disgust. "Judge," I said, "I have the timestamps. I have the bank records showing the transfer from the trust to Mr. Vance's personal LLC 2 days after my father's funeral." Beatrice lunged for the microphone, knocking the stand over with a screech of feedback that made everyone cover their ears. "Lies," she shrieked, no longer the poised socialite but a cornered Nimmel, she forged it, she's jealous. She's jealous of my life. "Your life is a lie, Mother," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the stunned silence. "You didn't build this legacy. Dad did, and Mark builds his legacy every day with his own hands. You're the only one here who has never built a thing." I turned to the crowd. "Enjoy the party," I said, "but I wouldn't cash any checks from the foundation tonight. The accounts are frozen as of this morning." I felt Mark's hand on my back, warm and steady. "Let's go, Eddie," he whispered. We turned and walked away. Behind us, chaos erupted. I heard the judge shouting at Charles. I heard Beatrice sobbing, screaming for someone to help her, but for the first time in her life, no one moved. The circle she had curated, the status she had worshipped, dissolved in an instant. They didn't step forward to comfort her. They stepped back, terrified of the scandal, leaving her alone on the stage with her overturned roses and her spilled champagne. We walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air. My legs finally gave out and I stumbled. Mark caught me. You did it, he said, pulling me into a hug that lifted me off my feet. You actually did it. We did it, I sobbed into his shoulder. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. Beatrice's friends turned on her with the speed of piranhas. The judge, embarrassed that he had associated with a fraud, pushed the docket through in record time. Charles Vance didn't just get disbarred, he was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. It turned out my father's trust wasn't the only cookie jar he had his hands in. Once the domino fell, his entire practice collapsed. He took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, but his career and reputation were incinerated. Beatrice was removed as trustee 3 weeks after the gala. The court appointed an independent fiduciary to audit the mess she had made. The findings were grim. She had blown through nearly 40% of the principal. To pay it back, the estate had to be sold. The mansion on the hill, the symbol of her status, the place where she had looked down on us for years, was put on the market. The proceeds went back into the trust to restore what she had stolen from Leo. Beatrice moved into a 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community 3 towns over. It was a nice place, perfectly adequate, but to her, it was a prison. She had lost her audience. She had lost her leverage. We didn't sue for full custody of her life, but we set firm boundaries. I control the trust now. Beatrice receives a monthly stipend, enough to live comfortably, but not enough for galas, not enough for trips to Paris, and certainly not enough to buy influence. She tried to call, mostly to complain about the condo's HOA or to blame me for her social exile. I stopped answering. Eventually, the calls stopped. 6 months later, we held another birthday party for Leo. It wasn't at a country club. It was in our backyard. Mark had built a new pergola, weaving jasmine vines through the cedar beams. He had built a custom treehouse for Leo, a masterpiece of carpentry with a rope bridge and a lookout tower. The air smelled of barbecue smoke and laughter. Our friends were there, real friends, the kind who helped you move furniture and didn't care what brand of shoes you wore. Sarah and Dave were there, clinking beers. I stood on the back porch, watching Mark and Leo. Mark was showing Leo how to properly sand a piece of wood for a birdhouse they were building together. You have to go with the grain, bud, Mark was saying, his voice patient and kind. If you fight against it, it gets rough. If you work with it, it gets smooth. Leo nodded, his tongue sticking out in concentration, his hands mimicking his father's. Like this, Dad. Exactly like that, Mark beamed. You're a natural, you've got good hands. I watched them, a lump forming in my throat. Beatrice had told Mark he was a failure. She had told Leo not to be like him. She was wrong. Mark wasn't just a builder of walls, he was a builder of men. He was teaching our son patience, skill, and the pride of creating something tangible. I walked down the steps and wrapped my arms around Mark's waist from behind, resting my cheek on his back. He smelled of sawdust and safety. Happy? He asked, turning his head to kiss my forehead. Deliriously, I said. I looked at Leo, who was laughing as he hammered a nail, surrounded by people who loved him for who he was, not for what he could become. We had the money now, the trust was secure. Leo could go to any college he wanted. He could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a landscape architect. But as I watched him high-five his father, his hands dusty and his smile wide, I knew the truth. If he grew up to be exactly like his father, kind, hardworking, and brave enough to stand by the people he loved, then he would be the richest man in the world. And that was a legacy money couldn't buy.